Be aware that this conversation may be uncomfortable for some and triggers may arise. Be mindful, and if you need help, please seek it. Thank you for being here with me on the Lift Oneself podcast, David. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
How is your heart doing?
How is my heart doing? My heart was struggling through the vaccinations that I did. And that was a real interesting experience. Speaking of kind of navigating the direct experiences. So I was torn about whether I would do it or not, because if you listen to the narrative, there's a narrative like, you have to do it. And then there's a narrative of, how could you do that? And, in our communities that we're in, there's both of them. And so it's really interesting to kind of observe your own experience as people are sharing their narrative and the collective narrative. And so I did what I always do, which is I asked for intuitive guidance. And even in my own house, there was different narratives that we were navigating, my wife and I and the children and the in-laws and all that. I decided I got a yes intuitively. And sometimes I'll get like a yes, 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 yes. And then like 3 days later, I'll be like, no, 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 no. Because it's moment by moment, right? I decided to wait about a week to see if the guidance would continue with a yes. And it wouldn't stop. So I was like, okay, fine. I guess I'm supposed to be doing this vaccine. So I did it the first time around. And this was about 6 weeks ago. And I did the Moderna, which is 2 times, right? It's like 1 time and then a month later. I got very sick. I connected to an expectation that, oh, you get sick on the second shot. So I had an expectation, which we know what happens when you're attached to something. And so I was in a lot of resistance. I was like, I'm not supposed to be sick. I'm really healthy. I work out all the time. I play basketball. I'm healthy. I'm this, I'm that. And I hadn't been sick for since you probably remember when I went to New York like a year and a half ago, we were messaging back and forth because I got violently ill. And that was my body purging out some kind of, old stuff. And so I had forgotten what it felt like to actually be sick. And I was very ill, in the bed for 3 days. It stayed with me for almost 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. I couldn't do my personal training, my exercise stuff. My trainer was like, are you okay? I was like, no, I'm not. So it was a very interesting experience because I had to really lean on the self-care practices and really practice what I preach. But it gave me a window into the collective pain to really understand that there are people that feel this way every day, all day. And living in my kind of bubble of self-care and really doing this deep internal work, I kind of forgot what it felt like to be that way. And so the vaccine was kind of a gift. I don't know, the whole story about COVID and all that, whether you get it or not get it and all that. But I'm just saying for me, when people say well, why'd you do the vaccine? And they want me to say, oh, because I don't want to get COVID. Or they want me to say, oh, because they want a story. And so what I've been saying to them is, I don't know. I don't know why I did it. I just did it because I got an intuitive guidance that said, you need to do this. And then the second time around, I was like, okay, what's going to happen this time? So the second time around, I was like, okay, number one, I accept this decision. I accept the chemicals that I'm putting through my body. I'm in full acceptance of it. There's no resistance whatsoever. And I trust my body to do whatever it needs to do. It was the same experience. I got sick again for almost 2 weeks, but I wasn't in resistance. So I didn't create suffering. I just kind of flowed with it. And I was like, oh, this is frustrating because I don't like to feel this way, But then that was the lesson for me to really go into the feelings and go into the sensations and to go into the discomfort and just sit in it and be like, oh, okay. And again, for me, the most meaningful experience for me was really understanding what people that are ill, what people that are depressed, what people that are struggling feel every day, all day. It really helped me with my work, with who I'm serving. And it was like, okay, I'm glad that I had this experience to really understand what it's like to not be the happy-go-lucky guy. Because my true nature is kind of happy-go-lucky. Even through all the trauma as a kid, I was always happy-go-lucky. But there's a risk to that because you can avoid the feelings and you can do the positivity, right? So anyway, long answer for how was my heart, but you always bring out the best in me. So I always, any question you ask me is going to be a very interesting answer. I know that right now.
Yeah, it's an honest one. And I thank you for that honesty. What I think also is we forget that the body has its own intelligence system and it's going to be uncomfortable. And we have been sold this kind of narrative that discomfort in the body is bad. So numb it, get rid of it. Where it's like, well, your immune system needs to process things and there's going to be discomfort. It's a detox. It's a purge.
Yeah.
So from what I know about the vaccines, it's not a cure for COVID. If and when you contract COVID, you won't have the severe symptoms.
Yeah,
So it's
exactly.
like a warranty protection. It doesn't mean you're not going to get into an accident. It just means that we're going to be able to help you build it back. What does self-care look like for you as a man?
Well, it's so interesting because I really had a lot of belief systems against self-care. My belief system around self-care was the rich white lady in Beverly Hills getting her nails done and spa day. I think the grittiness when you grow up like I did, and you're like, really, people? Like, this just sounds like a bunch of rich white people stuff, like, quite frankly, right? So for a long time as a kid, especially growing up in a beautiful town that I did in Santa Barbara, which, as many people know, is like Oprah's home for a long time. And now our royal friends are there. One of the most beautiful places on the planet. I ended up there because my dad had a dream to play rugby there from England, and he followed through on his dream. And then within a year, he lost $10 million. Being in these professional spaces as a man, because as you know, like the male identity is very tied to your career. I know it is too for the female, but like you hear about men that commit suicide because they, lose their job, they lose their farm, whatever it may be, because it is really their whole identity. So for my self-care, I was really in resistance to this whole notion and concept of self-care in general. So I had to work through that to really get clear on what are you resisting? And then once I did that, I was like, oh, this is really, really important. It's actually like the most important thing. And when I was dealing with a vaccine illness, I actually realized how much of a self-care routine I have and how it's really, really important to my life. Going back to the work thing, I really struggled with prioritizing it because I was conditioned that like you go right to work. Like first thing, like you get up, you take a shower, go to work, get there like, as early as possible. And so I've actually switched my calendar to kind of deal with my logical brain to where I don't start work till 11 o'clock. From 9 to 11, it's all self-care. I do whatever can put me into my body, and that keeps me grounded and keeps me connected to the source, right? I know that is movement. So I really empathize with you not being able to move. I'm glad you use the scooter, but like a walk, it's usually like 20 minutes to an hour of meditation. I always do sitting meditation for at least 10 to 30 minutes every day, no matter what. If I don't get to in the morning, I'll do it at some point throughout the day or at night. And that's like very, very vital. And then another piece of my self-care is reading spiritual texts, listening to a podcast, like whatever it may be that kind of brings me back to my higher self. Because if I don't do all those things regularly, I start to kind of go into the negative thought patterns. And it's like the dark energy just like takes over me. And I have to almost be like reminded. I don't do all the courses like I used to do, but I'm regularly connecting to the words, the frequencies, always kind of reminding myself of the immense power I have within. And so it takes all those things for self-care.
And you also created a men's group to allow men to get connected with their sensitivity. Can you share with us exactly what that looks like and what had you created?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's so interesting because when you said that you turned your trauma into resilience and like holding space and showing love, I was like, oh, that's pretty much like what I do in all of my programs. It's really about, number one, getting into your body. So like the first book we read was Boyd Barty. Basically, he lives in South Africa in nature, and he is a trained lion tracker. And it's so incredibly fascinating. He talks about how he trained by a South African man who's been doing lion tracking forever, and it's life and death. Okay. Getting into your body is life and death. So it's all about instinct. It's all about intuition. It's all about trusting your body. And so that's what we do with the men. It's like, hey guys, we've been really disembodied. We're not as good at feeling our emotions. We're not as good at expressing our emotions. We're not as good at feeling into our heart. Like we really, really struggle. So that's really the work we're doing with the men is how do we help men open up to another part of themselves that the culture has not really given us the permission to do. And a lot of men will be really open and sensitive with their girlfriends or their partners. That's it. Like there's not a lot of spaces for men to be open with other men, especially because I've observed this so many times with my wife. My own father, other men will speak to her about things like their feelings or what's going on in their life. And then I'll walk into the room and they'll immediately shut down just because there's another man in the space because they've been conditioned. And the movie that I watched is called The Mask We Live In. It's a movie about how the guy talks about the worst sentence in the whole entire English vocabulary is be a man, just be a man. One of the things they talk about is how boys are taught to stop crying around first grade. So I asked my son, I said, do you cry? He was in second grade. I said, do you cry on the playground? He was like, no. I was like, when did you stop crying on the playground? He's like, oh, right around first grade. So I was like, That's exactly what boys are taught. By that, they're taught way before first grade, but by first grade, they are not allowed to cry on the playground. So yeah, the men's group is really exciting, and it's hard to get men to actually regularly show up and continue to do the work because it's hard on us because we're not used to it's so uncomfortable. However, when men really commit, they accelerate. Like their growth is really accelerated and it's like really cool to watch.
And there is a narrative, boys don't cry. If you're seen as sensitive, then there's something with your sexuality. Again, stigmas around mental health because it's about mental health. It's your emotional intelligence. Yeah. Thank you for the work that you're offering and the guidance because it's huge for men.
Yeah. Mental health is a responsibility within. And when you become overwhelmed, the strongest, courageous thing you can do is ask for help. You do not have to do it alone.
When did you discover that what you had experienced as a child was considered a trauma?
That's such a great way to ask it. It's a good question. Probably not until just recently. But I remember speaking with my girlfriend when I was 18 years old. And I was kind of explaining to her, exactly what I just said. I wouldn't tell anybody, but then I had a girlfriend and I told her, I was explaining to her a lot of things that happened to me. And when I'd explained to her when I was 8 years old that a teenage boy basically was like, we were doing sexual acts. And she was like, that's sexual abuse. And I was like, what? Because I had such a context of like not a lot of structure and just raising myself that I just kind of assumed every little boy played around with teenage boys. Like that was just normal. And she was like, no, you were molested. And that was the first time that I actually kind of saw that as a trauma. The discomfort was so high that she started saying, this is bad or this is whatever, that I started really pushing it really far down. Like, well, don't ever think about that again. And don't ever talk about that or share that or think about it or tell anybody. So I never spoke to anybody about it ever again until the Dr. Shafali course, Year of Manifestation, which I know you probably remember because I posted about halfway through the year-long course. I was like, wow, I've been sitting in meditation and I keep getting this kind of like whisper around like something that happened to you as a child or like this thing around masculinity. Like I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew it was something about connected to that. And then I wrote on that page and it was like, like literally there was a release of energy. And then several people actually on the side messaged me and said like, thank you so much because I haven't faced it, or I never told my uncle, or I still live in a family where nobody knows what my uncle did to me. It's really powerful when you speak your story because then others have the courage to face their story. Dr. Shafali work, I was like, this is really like a big backpack, a big gorilla on my back that's actually kind of running my life. So then I just really started digging in on all of that, all of the different traumas. And you were around for a lot of this. So I really honor you for supporting me through it. I was like, let's face this. So my mom left when I was 8, then I was molested. She left again when I was 13, then she left when I was 15. And every time that abandonment energy, when I was doing the deconstruction, like what triggers me in my life, it was always about abandonment and abuse. So even the smallest thing of somebody abandoning me, like, hey, I'm not calling you for a week. It's like all the trigger patterns start running. The fear, the nervous system, cortisol goes way up, all that, and then it's when somebody is taking advantage. So that's the work that I've done in the last several years of really getting to know that part of me that feels really scared when something reminds it of the past. So if somebody doesn't call me back, it's like, okay, they're going to leave me. Somebody, does something that I perceive to be taking advantage of me. It's like, okay, that's like that older boy that took advantage of me, so it's every single route. And I stopped doing the whole like deconstruction journal and all that because I'm like, I don't need to spend 4 pages writing it out. I already know that that's the root of all the triggers is like the abandonment and the abuse. So then I just ask myself, what part of me right now needs to hear that there's an adult David now that's not going to let this happen, number one. And number two, even if the adult David did let you get into a bad situation, you're so incredibly tapped into the source and the light, like you're protected. You're beyond protected by whatever you believe in, angels, guides, whatever you want to call it, or not believe it. But for me, it's like, I know there's beings out there in the non-physical realm that are like, we're here to protect. So adult David understands how to make good choices. The inner child David did too, but like the inner child doesn't have to take on all of the pain and all of the stress and all of the overwhelm and all the things that this 8-year-old boy had to take on because his parents weren't there. I just love that 8-year-old boy so much. And I just say like, hey, listen, you don't need to do this anymore. And there's moments now, where things happen. And then I know right away because I can feel it in my body because I know where it constrains. And it's like, no. You don't have to run that program. It's okay. Let's go sit in meditation for an hour. Like I know the self-care is like, okay, 10 times the self-care, when I get really triggered. And then I'm able to go through the process of really just like telling that little boy, like, you're okay. Like, you are pure love. You are the most beautiful thing ever. Everything's going to be okay. And like you said at the beginning, everything's happening for us. And so it might suck, but I just remind him that it's all for our greater good. And everything's a lesson. And safety is the biggest thing. For that 8-year-old, he just needs to know, are you sure we're safe? Are you sure? He's never confident that we're safe. So I'm always like, yes, we're safe, totally safe. And that's changed everything for me because it calms everything down and it allows me to really connect with the flow of life and not be kind of like blocking it through my past pain,
For those that may not understand what inner child is, can you explain it from your point of view and how you define it?
Yeah, it's so interesting because a lot of times I think about it as like this negative thing, which is interesting. That's the way that I've kind of perceived it, but it's a psychological term. And I actually did these silent retreats for a few years. And unfortunately, the place burned down during the California fires in September. But the gentleman who runs the silent retreats is now in his late 60s. And he told me, he said, do you know I wrote one of the first inner child books ever when I was 25? And I was like, no, I didn't know that. His name's Bruce Davis, and he's a psychologist, but now he's doing these silent retreats and he's been kind of following the Eastern mysticism for years. So yeah, so it's a psychological term, meaning that there's parts of you when you were a child that are still kind of running your life. The way I think about it from more of a spiritual perspective is that you have these events as a child. They then embed into your psyche, into your like cells. And like the job of the inner child is to protect you, keep you safe. For me, the abandonment and the abuse, I would have one child transfer out of the school or one little thing about somebody leaving, a teacher, give their notice. And I would literally be triggered for like a week because the inner child was relating that experience to when my mother left. It's like, okay, someone's leaving you again. Okay, they don't care about you. You're worthless. You're terrible. You're this. And then those thoughts and those feelings become your program. And that's how you live your life. It's brutal. And if you look around, the majority of the world's living through their inner child pain, as you know.
The comfort that we perceive is actually self-sabotage.
Mm-hmm.
And the discomfort of coming into healing, which is connecting into your worth. Can you explain how that has been for you?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the discomfort because it's highly uncomfortable. The discomfort is the best teacher because it's helping you find what you're not willing to face. And you taught me this. If people could just be honest with themselves, just be honest with yourself. Because I knew that I had been molested, but I was not willing to be honest with it. I was not willing to look it right in the face. And I told my family just recently, I did a podcast episode. This is where the universe is so nice and precise. I did a podcast episode about 6 months ago. And I just said at the beginning, since I was molested as an 8-year-old or something, I just kind of dropped it in there. That's the one that my in-laws listen to, my sister, my niece, everyone's texting me. And I'm like, oh, thanks, universe. Now I didn't have to have this whole awkward thing where I'm calling people and messaging and saying well, who was it? What day? How old were you? Where was this? And it was just messaging me being oh, wow, we didn't know that. Are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm actually great. I'm really glad I faced it. And I mean, you can hear it in my voice now. There's not a lot of energy around it. There's a little bit, but it's pretty neutralized because I faced it. I worked through it and I embraced the discomfort to get to the other side of freedom, really. It's not going to control my life anymore.
Now that you understand your triggers, can you understand how you attracted certain experiences to create that comfort level of this is where we feel safe because we can kind of predict and control that narration? And as much as intellectually we'll say we don't deserve this, yet it's a feeling in the body. Yeah. And that feeling, that's where it feels comfortable. Can you see?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Towards you?
Yes, absolutely. I can connect that so precisely. And I shared this with the Inner Sangha group as I was going through it about 6 months ago. But when I was 8, abandonment, abused, no parents around for a long time. Right after that, I met a friend at the school. So I didn't really have any friends at school because I was just going through a lot, right? So I was just really withdrawn, really quiet. And I met a new girl at the school that was very, very dominant. The kids would call her Rambo because she was so masculine, right? Lack of a mother, right? Then I was in this very vulnerable space. I met her. She then became this protector for me in a weird way. I was deconstructing all these things about my own inner Sangha members. I was going back and I was realizing that since I was 8 years old, I've literally attracted what I call the bossy ladies. the subconscious mind is like, look, if I can attract someone who's competent and strong and very masculine, but also feminine, then I'll be okay. Because then I'll make up for the mother that I never had, right? That's what I wish my mother would have. So for 37 years, I was attracting this particular friend, coworker. Even when I started the school, I actually hired, and you helped me through this, I hired an employee that was that exact profile. And we worked very closely together. And that was exactly the pattern that I just kept running over and over and over and over, because like you said, you attract what's safe, and you're going to keep attracting the same thing until you face the internal issue. So then I really faced it, and I was like, okay, I'm going to change this pattern. And when it happens subconsciously, I'm going to be like, pause. I'm going back into that same program, that same pattern, different face, different name, same place, right? Like it's just basically the same. It's like they have different names, but it's the same personality type. And then I give away my power. Then my false self, the inner child, starts running the program. And he's kind of like, okay, now you dim your light, just like you did when you were 8, and you let this bossy lady tell you what to do. And I just decided that I was going to be very, very aware of that pattern and let the inner child know that you don't need to run that pattern. Because my work with Janet and the hypnotherapy, like we did a lot of work on, there's only really one mother you actually need, and that's the divine mother within you. And through hypnotherapy, you actually change your subconscious programming. You change your subconscious, right? Because it goes right into the subconscious mind. And so we were able to go in there and convince, I say convince because the subconscious mind would like stick in. And even during the hypnotherapy sessions, I would, Janet would say, let's clear that, or this is okay, or whatever, or really embrace your divine mother, or whatever she might've been saying while I was it's really deep meditation, but it's hypnosis. I would feel the energy within me being like, no, don't trust that lady. No, don't. Divine mother, this is a bunch of crap. Like, you are going to be ruined. You're going to be screwed. Like, and all this is coming in, and it's like, and then Janet would feel it. She'd be like, okay. And then she would get really motherly in her tone. She'd be like, okay, just let it go. Just let it, and then she's amazing. And then through that energy of her just reflecting back the divinity, right? Then there was something within me, within my soul, that was like, oh, I think I can actually let go of this. Oh my God, I've been holding on to this for so long, for 37 years. And I was able to just let it go. And so now when I see that I'm attracting a bossy lady into my space, I just know, how do I want to interact in this kind of human world? What boundaries do I have access to? Can they ever take advantage of me? No one can ever take advantage of you. And just what options do I have in this moment to either say yes or no? And then like I said at the beginning, I just go back to my intuitive guidance system. There might be some people that I need to have in my life that my human self is like, I don't really want them in my life because it's a lot of work. But intuitive guidance is like, you're going to deal with them because there's still something within you that needs to be dealt with. And they're going to be your best teacher. I'm like, okay, I'll do it.
This is a reminder that nowhere in the podcast is medical advice being given. It is personal experiences that are being shared. Inform yourself of the information needed for your personal life.
How do you support your mental health?
I think for me, the mental health is really like, how do you get really clear with the thoughts that are coming up? And like I said, to me, everything comes back to the inner children, because when I have those types of thoughts, like abusive thoughts, like you're abusing yourself with those types of thoughts. And I know you agree with this. And it's like, if you're abusing yourself, that's because there's parts of you that want to be seen and heard and loved. And if you can just ask yourself, what are you missing right now? Why is this energy coming up and saying to you, you're an idiot? I didn't fill out a form for the school. It was a tax exemption form. So I'm transitioning out of the schools. Most things I'm not doing anymore, but this is one that I hadn't transitioned over to anybody. And so I was supposed to do it. And it basically allows us not to get a $55,000 tax bill. So I didn't fill out the form. And then 2 months later, the director of operations said, oh, someone's asking for a copy of this form. Like, it just happened to be like some random question. I don't know what it was for, an auditor or something. And I said, oh my God, I never did the form. So for about an hour, I was abusing myself. I was like, how could you do this? You're an idiot. You're stupid. Like, you're a loser. And I went down into that hole of despair and the negativity and the judgment and the literal self-abuse, like abusing yourself. about an hour later, I reached out to the inner Sangha and just said like, hey guys, I really need some support right now. Like I'm really in the negative like spiral. And I know this is not, I know that I'm not even at neutral. Like I'm really way. They said some really great things. They asked some simple questions, and it allowed me to kind of get out of that dark despair. I realized that I was abusing myself. And then the funniest part of the story is that they charged us $200 for our fee. Like it wasn't $55,000, but I had already written a whole, Lifetime movie about how the school got closed down, everything. And so I recognize when I go into that now that there's just parts of me that are, and that was the 18-year-old. He was like, you're not allowed to make those kind of mistakes, because if you do, you'll be homeless. You don't get the mom and the dad that are, giving you the safety blanket. You don't have a choice. And so he believes that. And so I have to say to him, like, it's okay. Like we're allowed to not fill out a form. It's really okay. And I will not tolerate you abusing me. Like you can't speak to me about like that anymore. It's not okay. We don't speak to others like that. So we're not speaking to ourselves.
Thank you for sharing that, because that really gives people an insight. Because sometimes when people are explaining the practices, they aren't explaining that I actually have to apply these things because I do experience them. What you gave is a great perspective of why people can be suicidal.
Yeah.
Imagine
absolutely.
that is berating you all throughout the day. And we have been so stigmatized not to ask for help when we have mental faculties
Absolutely.
that are challenging.
Yeah.
With the awareness that you have right now, this is a reflective question.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to go back to the 18-year-old, and you only have 3 words to give. It could be formed in a sentence, or it can be just 3 individual words. What would those 3 words be for that 18-year-old?
What I got was, you are love. And then the mind said, well, but you have to tell me safe. You are love, you are safe. That's how I'd answer it. You are love.
Now, can you explain to the listeners where they can find you and what the work that you're doing out in the world?
Yeah, I feel like I've just kind of organically weaved it in without even trying. But yeah, everything's under davidkrichards.com. The men's group's actually free because I really, really want to encourage men to come in, and it meets monthly. There's 10 of us and we do Zoom conversations. It's pretty intimate and people are really honest there. What I've learned from that men's group, a lot of men don't have anyone to talk to. They really don't, because if they've been married for 20 years, they're maybe not being as honest with their wife anymore. They've kind of they're kind of in this more, not as a functional place, like sharing everything. So sometimes they just want someone to talk to. And so it's been really beautiful to see how much trust and love we've created in that men's group. And then I've mentioned the Inner Sangha, which is an intensive 12-week program with my friend, Stacy Mayhouse-Lewinsky. And that's a really intensive program where it's like daily interaction. And it's really for those that are ready to go on a healing journey and to be in a supportive group. Like if you're really wanting to go deep, these people go really, really deep. The progress is massive because we're all in it together. And then I do my one-to-one coaching. And like I said, I'm doing the Inner GPS, which is it's going to be a monthly course for $97, just so that a lot of people can access it. And then we didn't even talk about my education work, but I do a lot of work. There's Heart of the Matter, where I do a lot of work with schools and, helping reimagine how we're schooling our children. And then I have the podcast, which is A Conscious Way Forward, which I've mentioned. It's all on my website though. So thank you so much for the opportunity. I just love having conversations with you. So it was like, I kind of forgot it was being recorded. I just honor and thank you so much.
Thank you for being here and being so open and honest and allowing people to see how you do your inner work and what challenges there are. So I really thank you for taking the time and having a conversation. And I hope you'll come back to speak again.
Oh, anytime for you, Nat, anytime.
So remember, I appreciate you, and be kind with yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you for making it all the way to the end. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this conversation may have brought up triggers, discomfort. Know that there's help out there. And the strongest thing you can do for yourself is to ask for it. You don't have to do anything alone. I appreciate you being here and sharing the space of conversation so that we can erase the stigmas surrounding mental health. Please subscribe to our podcast and where possible, leave a review. Until next time, remember, be kind and gentle towards yourself. You matter.